Yes, hello to you all once again. Welcome back to another edition of Classic Dirt Bike TV. And if you're just a recent subscriber to my CDB TV channel, then welcome aboard, and I hope I continue to furnish you with more of these old school vintage classics from a way back in the day. Now, coming up next, we're going to take a look at a bike that was maybe not that prevalent in the early 1980s, and certainly here in the UK they were quite a minority machine, but over in Europe they were a bit more popular, and certainly I think they were virtually unknown internationally. So we're going to take a look at this machine now, so let's jump straight into that video and take a look at this 1981 Kramer LR410. Right, okay, so as I said, these Kramer motorcycles weren't as well known or maybe even as popular as some of the other European bikes of that era, but these were still very highly competitive and very quick machines, because they did have a very light tubular steel chassis, and of course they were powered by an Austrian-made Rotax two-stroke engine. Now, Fritz Kramer initially ran a motorcycle dealership in Laubus, Esbach, Hesse in Germany, a business that was, of course, originally set up by his father some years before. But Fritz had actually raced and sold DKW motorcycles, which later led to him having an affiliation with the German Mico brand, that eventually led to their motorcycles to be rebranded Kramer Micos, which didn't initially sell in big numbers, with I think it was only around 80 bikes being produced between 1975 and 1976. Now, they say it was around 1977 when Kramer began using Rotax two-stroke motors to power their bikes, which were now simply named Kramers, which at that time were a massive hit with off-road racers around Europe, with many of their bikes being sold in France, as they had an official dealer and importer of the bikes in that particular country. But later in 1980, Kramer then got themselves into financial difficulties and then eventually folded, they say, due to some kind of argument about money that was due to them from various sources. But it was some time later that a man named Peter Heuser, who was already an importer and distributor of certain motorcycles, bought what was left of this once great Kramer name, and then he tried to relaunch them in the mid-1980s, although that particular venture for Peter didn't go too well, because facing financial ruin, Peter then sadly took his own life and committed suicide. So eventually in 1982, a brand new company was then formed in Italy called Kramer Italia, or Kram IT, as you sometimes see on these kind of bikes. But various changes of the Kramer brand came and went in the following years, and it's said that the last owner of this once great Kramer motocross brand was said to be Reinhard Hollat in the 1990s. And so what we're actually looking at here is a 1981 LR410 model with, of course, that lightweight tubular steel chassis, and it's powered by an Austrian Rotax two-stroke motor. But of course, looking at this bike from this rear angle, it looks suspiciously like this machine has monoshock rear suspension, but it does indeed, of course, have twin shock units there that are hidden underneath the bike seat. But some of the people who aren't that familiar with these Kramers do tend to pass them off as some kind of modern day monoshock racer. So one of the reasons that these Kramers were so quick and successful for the limited time that they were around in the 1980s were mainly due to the performance and reliability of this quite awesome 410 Rotax two-stroke motor, which of course is the big brother of the much smaller 250. And if you're familiar with these Rotax two-strokers, then I'm pretty sure that you don't need me to tell you just how good and how suitable these engines were as a motocross bike power plant, because not only were these engines used on these German-built Kramers, but on a host of other race bikes as well during the 1980s, including the likes of Can-Ams and Puch and SWMs, and of course many others, and even the British-built Cotton EMX or EMCs used these Rotaxes to power their bikes in that 1980s era. But almost straight away you can see that the Kramer logo is here on the clutch casing, which was more or less what all of the other different manufacturers did who used these engines in their bikes. They more often than not just stuck their own logo on this part of the bike's motor. But as we move on to the bike's rear swing arm, again you can see it was just a simple tubular steel type of construction that had a spring loaded chain tensioner and guide that ran along the bottom section of the unit. And this did look very intricate and high tech for 1981, as you can see, but in terms of its function on the track, apparently these parts did work very well. But you can see in this rear shot of the bike that it does indeed have a pair of conventional twin shocks here at the back of the bike, not mounted either side of the swing arm in the usual conventional fashion, but laid down very neatly here underneath the bike's seat, which is why these kind of Kramers were always mistaken for a modern bike, because you couldn't see any suspension parts from the side view of the bike. And once more, of course, it was a plastic fuel tank on our 81 Kramer, just like most other motocrossers of that 1980s era, and both of the bike's side panels were just moulded plastic, as you can see, which naturally all helped towards making these Kramers a very light and highly flickable race bike. And of course that nice barcode there on the side with made in Germany. And even our particular Kramer example here appears to still have its original exhaust expansion chamber that looks like it doesn't have much in the way of track damage on it with regards dings and dents. And also this alloy tailpipe is definitely the original that was fitted at Kramer HQ back in the 1980s, so it's quite surprising just how many stock parts are still bolted onto this relatively rare machine. Now, although I've never actually ridden one of these Kramers myself, I did have a friend back in the day that actually raced these bikes, and I can remember he was always commenting on just how comfortable these Kramer seats were, because they did have quite a generous amount of padding, so it was quite a nice place to rest your backside on in between those big bumps on the racetrack. So as we move on to the front end of our Kramer now, naturally it's Mico forks and a Mico front hub here on the front, because Kramer, just like many of the other smaller manufacturers never actually made all of their bikes' components themselves, and they usually bought in parts from other sources to complete their bikes. And with Kramer at one time being associated with Mico, then as you can see, it's no surprise that they used German Mico suspensions on their race bikes. Which, of course, brings us around to one of the non-original parts fitted on our German Motocrosser. I'm talking, of course, about those hideous black wheels. Now, although the actual wheels are indeed the correct items for this bike, I still just can't get this fascination for painting over some nice gold or polished alloy rims to colour these wheels black. And I just can't help but thinking about what this bike would have looked like with a nice pair of gold or maybe alloy wheels, because not only do black rims look hideous on a classic bike, the actual cost to have them done certainly can't be cheap. But anyhow, rant over, and let's get back to the bike. But make no mistake, these 81 LR410 German-built Kramers were fantastic bikes, and they were every bit as good as any similar two-stroke European bike of its era, because of that lightweight steel chassis, that well-proven Mico suspension on the front, and that quite radical twin-shock suspension layout at the rear. And of course, couple all of that together with what was probably one of the most powerful European two-stroke motors of its day, then you virtually had a race-winning machine that came straight from the crate. But I certainly do remember this bike's owner and rider David Ray racing this bike, and I was well impressed with the way it actually performed on the track. And the bike basically did everything originally advertised on the tin, because it handled very well and was super quick and flickable, as of course most Kramers were. Okay, so we've had a quick look at the bike. Now let's just see if we can get David to fire it up, and we'll have a quick listen to what this bike actually sounds like. Okay, so there you go, another almost original example of a quite rare and iconic German-built racer, even although it has those black wheels. Anyhow, that's David Ray's 1981 LR410 superb Kramer Motocrosser.